Breadbox Media programming is brought to you by. Celebrate our God-given freedom and faith while honoring our Blessed Mother with Ghirelli's USA Rosary. Each state is represented on this rosary's 50 beads. Red, white, and blue enamel adorn its patriotic crucifix. Get yours today. Shop www.ghirelli.com. Introducing the redesigned CatholicSingles.com, featuring new ways that put the spotlight on the person and their faith, not just a profile picture. For the past 20 years, faithful Catholics have used CatholicSingles.com, and the reimagined CatholicSingles.com website is ready to help single Catholics take the next step in sharing meaningful relationships with other faithful Catholics. Remember, CatholicSingles.com for faith, fellowship, and love.
Everyone, and welcome back to this week's podcast episode. We've had a slew of great conversations the last few weeks, and I'm really excited for today's encounter, which is with someone whose work is new to me. But after having read this book that we're going to highlight today, I'm just so excited to introduce you to a new friend of the podcast, Stephen Auth. Steve has had a long career on Wall Street and has been working most recently with federal investors, where he serves as the executive vice president and a chief investment officer of Federal Global Equities. He's a frequent guest on CNBC, Fox Business News, Bloomberg TV, and many other places. But we're here today to discuss his wonderful new book, The Missionary of Wall Street, From Managing Money to Saving Souls on the Streets of New York. Welcome to the show, Stephen Auth.
Thank you, Lisa.
Well, first of all, just kudos on the book. I want to jump into a conversation about that. But one of the first things that I always like to discuss with my guests is just an open-ended question, just to ask you to tell us a little bit more about your story and how you got to where you are in your own faith journey right now.
Lisa, probably the most relevant thing, maybe relative to the book, is I'm a fallen away Catholic. I grew up as an altar boy, but pretty much lost my faith by the time I'd gotten out of Princeton and then Harvard. And you know, I could blame it on them, but it really probably my fault more than anything else. But in any case, started a long journey back home. I fell in love with a young woman who's become my spiritual muse, my wife Evelyn. She's a devout Catholic, and gradually came back to the faith. And by the time the book starts, I'm pretty much, I think you'd call me a Sunday Catholic. Mm-hmm. And, then some things start to happen that take me to a deeper level. One of them is recounted in the book where I nearly died from a heart incident during the first big market crash back in 2002. And not due to that, but due, I don't know, physical reasons. But in any case, I had a moment there where a priest I had met just recently found out about it. It was Thanksgiving Day, and he drove up from Maryland to visit me and offer me the sacrament, last rites. And I had the chance to have my first confession in probably 30 years. And my walk away from that was Father John said to me, Steve, you're a guy who's got many talents that were given to you by the Lord, but you haven't really been a very good steward of them. You're using them for yourself and not for Him. And I kind of resolved at that moment, if I survived this, that I would follow the call. And I didn't really know where that was leading, Lisa. In fact, I'm still not sure where it's leading. But it led to a resolution to be more focused on Him and having Him become much more a part of my life. And what's remarkable to me, and a little bit you get this sense in the book, that and of course you know this because you're a missionary in your own right for many years. The more you give yourself to the Lord and work alongside of Him, the more little miracles probably would have been happening all the time, but you didn't recognize, you begin to see. And you actually draw closer to Him. And so in some ways the book is about my own journey, but it's very subtle and it's sort of in between the lines. More about the book is about what's going on in the streets of New York, but maybe that's a way to give you a little sense of where I'm coming from. And maybe the last point is, what really motivates someone who has fallen away from the faith and has had the chance to come back, and certainly it drives me, and a lot of my fellow missionaries maybe, but particularly the leader here, that's what this mission is all about. It's going out into the streets, finding the people that have fallen away from the faith, and giving them a hand to come back. Because I really am sure that many of them want to come back. They just don't know how to get there. And, in a way that I was one of them, in a way, maybe it gives me a particular incentive to try to find them.
Yeah, it's a really compelling story, and you begin early. And the book from the very first chapter is just totally engrossing. I found myself not wanting to put it down, which that's a great gift, to have both the desire to share your faith and also to have the skills as a communicator to pen something so compelling. Is this your first book related to your faith journey?
Yeah, I was about to chuckle on the answer. It was my first book. My first book was a scholarly piece about the French and Indian War, written way back when I was at Princeton. But it's the first book about my faith. And I've been writing a blog about the mission for 10 years now, signed simply by someone mysteriously called a missionary. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people have been pushing me to turn that, to use those notes, to talk more about the lessons brought out of the mission and try to encourage other people to do it, but really kind of to come out of the closet a little bit, if you will, on who this missionary is. And,
well, it's kind of an apt term, because what we're talking about here is not a missionary who stepped away from everything else, but this is sort of a both and, that you continue, very actively in your pursuit of your day job, which is, quite a substantive one. And then at the same time, this seems to be a really driving passion in your life, something that would bear such great fruit. I want to have you kind of tell people who haven't had a chance to see the book yet, kind of the context of the mission work, and you unfold this, your entry into it, but this is an ongoing work of your parish in New York that's evolved actually into even greater realms. So tell us a little bit more about how it got started and what it looks like now.
Right. Well, how it gets started, at least, because it sounds like you've read the books. It's a reference in the second chapter. The first chapter starts in this foggy side dark alley with this missionary encountering an ex-con packing a gun. But then it flashbacks to the start, and it's another crisis. It seems 2009, and I'm dealing with the markets. I'm in Pittsburgh, where I actually am today, as an example, dealing with what's going on in the markets. And I get a call from my wife, God bless her, as I collapse in my hotel room. Steve, I've signed us up to do this mission in New York City. And, I've been doing missions in Mexico. But the idea of doing Australia, I asked her, what are we going to do, stand on the street corner looking for Catholics? And she said, yeah, that's exactly what we're going to do, I go, sweetheart, you have no idea. I mean, New York City, this will never work. They're just going to be putting cigars out on our foreheads. So I put that in there because that section, because one of the things that I was worried about with this book was that people would view me as some holy roller, special calling, Saint Steve or something, that's doing something that seems impossible, and not realize that it's really more this is a person who said yes, and the Lord then equipped him to do it. And it's really the Lord doing it, not this missionary. In fact, many of us could do this. But to answer your question, what we actually are doing, as crazy as it sounds, is we're literally standing on street corners in New York City, inviting people to come back to church, and particularly to get them back to the sacrament of confession. And over the years, the mission's grown. We've had over 1,000 missionaries doing this now. We do it 4 times a year around key points of the church calendar. Particularly Holy Week is very effective. We do it at Ash Wednesday. We do it during Advent. We do it in the San Gennaro Festival. But try to have a presence in each season. And we think we've spoken now on the streets, at least greeted over 3 million people. There's great pedestrian flow. This is in it's another question I get is people think it's, in the South Bronx or something, dealing with homeless people. It's one of the most affluent neighborhoods in New York City, and we're catching people on their way to dinners and fancy restaurants when they least expect to run into a missionary, saying, hey, how's your spiritual life going? And our objective is, at one level, simply to touch them, get them thinking about their spiritual life. And at another objective is to try to get them back to the church, and particularly to the sacrament of confession. Because in my experience, in my own life, what happens when you fall away from the church is you start making your own rules, and you start rationalizing bad behaviors, and deep down you know that you're on the wrong track, and you start to build a wall between yourself and the Lord. And at some point you kind of wake up and realize it, and you don't think you're forgivable, you don't think there's a way back. And in a way what we're doing is radical intervention. When people least expect it, we're giving them the chance to grab your hand and find a way back to the Lord. And then what happens is they go to their first confession in 20, 30, 40. We had 160 years, had not been in the sacrament. And they come back out of the church, and this is what keeps the missionaries coming back. They come back out of the church literally glowing, hugging us, crying. Their lives are changed, and they've had a chance. They've realized that they're still a beloved son or daughter of God, and we don't keep a clicker, but we think roughly we've probably brought about 15,000 people back to the sacrament of confession over 10 years. So I don't know if you think that's a lot or a little, but I always tell people multiply it by eternity, and it's a big number.
One person would be amazing. Those numbers are amazing. But one thing that I really loved about the book, it has a real teaching premise and applicable points really to anyone in, no matter where you are in your spiritual journey. But I love the way that you recount the stories. And I'll say that, if your desire is not, to be cautious about not having people think that you're, totally Saint Stephen already. I think you're a very humble chronicler, and you do a great job in the book of recounting through various stories that you share, some that you've encountered personally, and that some are that are of other missionaries. This very interpersonal, names are obviously changed, but we meet so many characters along the way that we can kind of relate to this in our own life. One thing that I found interesting is that the missionaries wear a T-shirt that says, "Be not afraid." And I'm wondering, what it is. Now, you are an accomplished career professional. I'm wondering what it is about what you've learned about courage and perseverance in the work of a missionary that has blessed your life as a business leader and as a family leader and just as a man in general.
Yeah, Lisa, there's actually a long list of virtues that the Lord has honed in me on the streets of New York. You could start with fearlessness and confidence. The thing about Catholics is we have this, I call it a joy that's different than happiness. Happiness is very shallow at times. And this is one of the problems in the streets of New York. A lot of people are pursuing this secular lifestyle that they've been told will make them happy, and at a certain level they are. But deep down, they're not joyful. And Catholics, we're confident in our future and our relationship with the Lord. And that confident joy is something that's very valuable as a leader of a lot of people in a business organization. You know, other things like perseverance. I mean, I think that comes through pretty big in the book, the perseverance of the missionaries. But that's another thing in the workplace that's a huge value as an investor. Self-mastery, integrity, humility, which in your book that you just wrote a couple of years ago that I really enjoyed reading, you have a chapter on that. And, as an example, in December of this year when the markets were getting crushed and my role as the chief investment officer at Federated, I viewed as one-fold. Simply hold people together. Let's not panic. We've got a longer-term view. And my mantra that I was reciting in every meeting to people was confidence at the highs, humility at the lows, integrity always. Those are missionary virtues.
Oh, absolutely.
But from an investment perspective, that held our portfolios together. And, we've had an incredible 2019, largely because we held our ground at very tough times. And that's what missionaries do, So, there's a lot of cross currents here. It's kind of hard to segregate them. Following the Lord becomes a 24/7 practice, not a Sunday morning. As I said, I was kind of a Sunday morning Catholic.
Yeah, you said you had God in a box on Sunday mornings.
Yeah, I had God in a box, exactly.
Well, kind of going through some of the types of individuals that you encounter on the streets and in the book, I want to ask you about a few specific examples of missionary life. And one of the first that struck me was, how you're interacting with people who have fallen away from the church, whether intentionally or just out of busyness of life or whatever. Say a few words about how what you've learned can help maybe somebody who has a loved one in their life who's not actively practicing their faith anymore.
Yeah, that's a good question, Lisa, and I think you alluded to this, that the book was written at one level to help people do missions on the street, if you will. But it really does speak, I think, broadly to how you can be a missionary in your own life, just with your family. So, and I'm glad you're kind of picking up on that theme because it's a key reason I wrote the book, because I think the applicability here is quite broad. But as an example, folks that are following their own path, and we get that brushback pitch, all the time. No thanks, I'm spiritual, not religious. I have a chapter on this in the book, I think. I always try to approach people with questions, not answers. When you start answering too much, you kind of turn people off. So, my typical question there would be, how's that working for you? And, And if you ask it in the right way, not in a challenging way, but in a kind of deeply loving way and interested way, which is how the missionaries ask that question, because we are deeply interested, honestly. I mean, I'm there for them. I can feel their pain, if you will. Inevitably, the answer is not really well. And
that's sort of then a bridge to a conversation.
Yeah, that becomes a bridge to a deeper conversation. And so, we try to meet people where they're at, not where we're at. But most people, if you ask the right questions, and there's chapters on all these different issues that we've encountered, and kind of suggestions on how to approach them, and illustrate, as you said, by some of these wonderful stories that as you read them, you can't help but begin to say there's something greater than these missionaries at work here. I mean, the number of coincidences is just mind-boggling.
Yeah, I was really,
so cool.
I was very moved by a chapter that you write on your missionary encounters with people of other faith traditions and finding some commonality there. And you illustrate the story of a young man and asking him to pray for you, to light a candle and to pray for you. Say a little bit about that story and that act of missioning to people who have a belief system that may be different from Catholicism.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe you're referring to the story of Josh, who's a young Jewish man, and he went rushing by me. I asked him, our pickup line is, "Are you Catholic?" It's a very provocative question, actually, if you think about it. And his response to me as he went rushing past was, "Of course not. I'm Jewish, and you people are all trying to kill us." And I chased him down. I said, "Josh, I can't let that pass. I mean, come on, we're not trying to kill you." And he goes, "Oh, you are." And the more angry he got, the more generous and loving I became. And what happens eventually is Josh and I have this extensive encounter on the streets. And at some point, he confides in me that his own spiritual life is in disarray. And he describes himself as having a hole in his heart. And in the end of the day, I say, "Josh, maybe it's because of God. I mean, where are you with God?" And we get into that, and he's not going to his synagogue anymore. He's fallen away from his own Jewish faith. And at the end of the encounter, he's left promising me he's going to go back to the synagogue this weekend and pray for us, and I promise him the same. Maybe that's what you're referencing, and I think it's an example of, we deal with this a lot. I mean, in affluent Soho, it's a hotbed of alternative lifestyles. There's a huge heterogeneity in the population. We had a Hindu monk observing us for 15 minutes or so, only a few feet away, and I was had my eye on him. I'm wondering if this is going to be some kind of confrontation. And he comes over to me after 15 minutes and he said, "Steve, I got to say, I know you guys are Catholic, and I obviously am Hindu, and I'm not going to become Catholic, but what is really stunning to me is I've watched you both be rejected by people and engage people, and you obviously love deeply every person that you're meeting." And he said, "That's really impressive, and I just want to encourage you guys to keep doing what you're doing."
Wow.
And that's the wow, Lisa. Like, that's, to me, people talk about, and you mentioned in your book about St. Francis, and speak as little as possible. Mm-hmm. If we can simply witness true Christian love, if you think about it, the early church, when it was expanding at a rapid pace throughout the known world, I think it was largely the example of agape love that the early Christians demonstrated, the self-sacrificing love. And that was so impressive to people and so counter to the culture at that time. And think about it today. Isn't that the case today, right? This is the love me, myself first, second, and third generation, if you will. And we're all pursuing these hookups and all this very shallow form of love. And we don't even know what agape means anymore. And when people see that on the street, even if they're atheists, and I tell the missionaries, just love them in. Love, don't think. Don't try to argue the atheists in. Just witness a joyful, loving Christian to them, and be kind to them and find shared values. And there are always. Sometimes you can go even deeper and end up getting a conversion of some sorts, right? But even if you don't, you've left them thinking a little differently about Christianity and the joys of our faith. And I think that's a very important moment for people.
Yeah, there's a witness in that. You actually anticipated one of the things I was going to ask you about. And just to highlight that particular chapter, one thing that you say toward the very end of that chapter, you say, above all, never assume that a soul is out of reach just because that person doesn't look like a good prospect. only God knows what's going on inside that person's heart. It's taken us years, but we've finally learned never to judge hastily. That's a huge takeaway for me, and thinking about the fact that we don't know. We've had a brief encounter with someone. We've shared the best that we can give them. We've been a sign of love to them. Then we have to leave it in God's hands and trust. So I found that chapter to be very encouraging. I wanted to ask you, because I know this is one of the things that I face and in my urban life in Los Angeles. Now, I know that you're on the streets, and you've mentioned that a lot of the people that you interact with are affluent or people of means, but I know also you encounter people who go without, and you tell the story of one homeless woman who was touched by missionary efforts. Have you ever had, I'm sure you have, encounters where the need for spiritual encouragement and spiritual conversion was coupled with a need for really physical needs, whether food or shelter, and how you handle those situations if and when they come up?
Well, we don't. Yes and no. I mean, we actually have, as part of the mission, a broader charity effort going on. We do something called the Midnight Run, and a lot of the teens that get involved with our missionary effort do that. And we try to mix that together. There are times, though, what you're getting at is someone that we've encountered on the streets. What do we do if they've got a big physical need? That's usually fairly easily resolved. There is a Catholic charity nearby.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Bowery Mission. There's a lot of programs in the area that we've gotten familiar with and know of that we can get someone to. So there, we try to stay in touch with other resources in the city that we can put people in touch with. Obviously, we're not, we're doing a spiritual mission, so we don't have the ability to carry with us a lot of means of solving those problems. But given that it's a pretty rich environment in the city, it's easy for us to link into other things. Or that even goes to abortion as an example. I mean, we had an incredible incident in Holy Week this year where a few of our missionaries actually intervened between a young woman who was struggling with getting an abortion and her what looked to us like an abusive boyfriend who was insisting on it. And she went back and forth to the Planned Parenthood clinic 2 or 3 times, and our guys showed up on a street corner at just that moment. Wow. And kind of stood between them and kind of protected her. And she really resolved. That gave her the courage. You said, "Be not afraid." They had their "Be not afraid" shirts on. It gave her the courage to say no. And we immediately got her. We literally walked her, because we know where the Sisters of Life are based. And we walked her right to the Sisters of Life and got her checked in there. So, it's a pretty rich city. There's a lot of resources for us to grab onto. We don't try to recreate all the wheels. You know?
That's incredible. I wanted to ask you, Steve, you share something very personal towards the end of the book, and you've mentioned Evelyn, your beautiful wife, and your partner in this missionary work. And you share an encounter, with that she had, someone who was brought into the church, but it's also a personal story of hers and her health. And I wonder if you might say a few words about that, and just how even in challenging times, her eyes have been opened, and that's resulted in a gift of faith to other people.
Yeah, I mean, Lisa, there is some in the book. I didn't want to turn the book too much into a story about Evelyn and I. We both have different health issues we deal with, and a couple are referenced for both of us in the book. But Evelyn suffers from a blood cancer that's incurable but treatable. And then late in the book, there's this new issue that comes up, this brain tumor. And we just learn that when you're in the hands of the Lord, I was actually praying on this morning because Evelyn's at a spiritual retreat in Rome, and she's coming home to me tomorrow night. I'm so excited that she's coming back. But and the nuns have taken very good care of her over there. I was always worried that they're going to check her in permanently. But Lisa, and I'm sure you get this, that true love, when you're really in love with the Lord, you know in your heart that your beloved would never do anything to harm you. And it may not be what whatever's coming, it may not be something that you want in your life. But if you embrace it, always good things come out of it, And we even have a section in the book. It's not a chapter, but there's a part of a chapter about embracing suffering. And it's been a very beautiful thing for Evelyn and I as we struggled through some of her issues. And it's strengthened our marriage, and it's strengthened our relationship with the Lord. And often some incredibly positive things come out of it. And I don't want to ruin the ending.
Yeah, I was going to say, you folks, you have to read through to the end. Yeah. Well, I hope that this is not the last book. That this is just a start to the work that you'll share on this. Again, the name of the book is The Missionary of Wall Street. Our guest is Stephen Auth, Auth, and the book is from Sophia Institute Press. Just a remarkable read and really a great page turner. Steve, are there any kind of closing thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners before we let you get back to work?
Just that I would encourage your listeners, and I know you're doing that every day, but I would just encourage them to, to answer the call. There's so many elements of being a missionary in your life, but I think the hardest one is simply picking up the phone. And we hear it ringing, and we know it's an ask that we're not going to be happy about. And sometimes we just don't pick up the phone. And I always tell the missionaries, can you tell me one time when you answered the call of the Lord and you regretted it? They can always tell me a lot of examples of times that they didn't answer a call of the Lord and regretted it. But if you think about it, so be not afraid. I mean, the Lord is with us.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, again, I really want to encourage our listeners. Is there a site, Steve, that people can check out the mission at or to learn a little bit more in case they want to replicate this, along with purchasing the Missionary of Wall Street? Is there any place to go to learn more about what you're doing?
If you go into the Sophia Institute press page, they're the publisher of the book, so yes. Sophia Institute Press, find the Missionary of Wall Street, then on that site you'll see a link, if you want to become a missionary, literally, you can click a link and it'll take you into the Regnum Christi site where the New York City mission is organized.
Awesome. We'll definitely have a link to that in our show notes. I'm just so grateful for your time, and especially for this witness and the beautiful work that you've done with the book. It's really encouraged me. I will definitely be reading it again in the weeks ahead and implementing, hopefully, some of these your courageous strategies in my own life. So thank you so much, Steve, for your time, and again, for a great book, The Missionary of Wall Street.
Thank you, Lisa.
Well, friends, that is it for this week's episode of the podcast. I really do just want to say that this is a book that's both inspirational and actually very interesting, filled with great stories. So be sure, if you love a good story, to check it out and to share it with a friend, The Missionary of Wall Street. We'll have links in our show notes for all the ways that you can get a hold of it. We want to thank you for all of your prayers and recently for our family. My mother's healthcare situation continues to be a challenge, so we appreciate those prayers. And we send them back to you. I hope you have an awesome week, and we'll see you next time on the show. God bless.
I'm Father Dwight Longenecker. I'd like to invite you to join me for a pilgrimage tour to France this September. It's based on my book, St. Benedict and St. Therese, The Little Rule and the Little Way. I'll be teaching about the spiritualities and the lives of these two great saints, and we'll be visiting the great monastery of Fleury, where St. Benedict's relics are venerated, and of course going to Lisieux to visit the childhood home of St. Therese, the Carmel where she was a nun, and the great basilica dedicated to her honor. But there's more than that. At Paris, we'll be visiting the Basilica of Sacré-Cœur, Rue de Bac with the Miraculous Medal, going on to Vézelay, Nevers with St. Bernadette, Paris-le-Monial, where the devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus was given to St. Margaret Mary, and then Chartres Cathedral, Mont Saint-Michel, the Normandy beaches, and more. I think there's not only going to be time for instruction and learning, but also prayer and worship, celebrating Mass in the various locations, and also time for fellowship and a good bit of French food and wine, too. Come and join us this September. If you'd like to know more, go to CatholicHeritageTours.com. That's CatholicHeritageTours.com, or be in touch with me through my website, DwightLongenecker.com.
Breadbox Media programming is brought to you by Jack Kane Ford. Find your next Ford Tough vehicle at caneford.com.